Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil mursalin. Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Rabbi yassir wa la tu'assir. Rabbi tammim bil khair. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. Alhamdulillah, today we are still going to talk. I'm going to touch a little bit about some events that when we study about the Prophet ﷺ and how he has conquered Makkah peacefully, we tend to focus on the fact that he entered peacefully and then he left. But there were so many meaningful events that happened in between his conquest and before he left back for Madinah. So there were some things that actually happened that I want us to take to appreciate, to reflect upon, because in the Prophet's timeline, in the Prophet's life, all these small events, they are small because they are in relation to the big events. When we study history, there's this tendency to focus on big events. But if you look at how the scholars and how they actually extract important events in the study of history, even small events become very significant, especially in current times when we tend to we focus on big things, on things that have major outcomes. But sometimes things that have major outcomes themselves, they are dependent, they are triggered by small things that we appreciate, that we internalize, and we act upon. So today we're going to look at three incidents that the Prophet ﷺ went through that we're going to share, and then after that we hope that we can learn something from it. Firstly, the Prophet ﷺ, remember, when he entered into Makkah, and Makkah was his birthplace, Makkah was his homeland. So when he entered into Makkah to Mukarramah, and then he was reunited with his people, he forgave them, and therefore the ties of kinship were restored. They were actually strengthened. So when this thing happened, the people of Madinah, the companions who were known as Ansar, Al-Ansar, the people provide assistance, they started to get worried because they loved the Prophet ﷺ so much. And the time spent with the Prophet ﷺ, even though it was just for a period of 10 years, they felt that it was short and they wanted more time with the Prophet ﷺ. Now, when they see that the Prophet ﷺ has started to warm up to his people, to return back to Makkah peacefully, and things are looking well, so the worry is that the Prophet ﷺ will stay permanently in Makkah, and that the Prophet ﷺ will eventually, sort of forget them. So there was this talk amongst them that, oh, is the Prophet staying? Is the Prophet going to leave us? And henceforth, the Prophet ﷺ caught wind of what they were discussing about their concerns, because he is more sensitive towards the sentiments of others. And he asked them what was their concern, and they said they were concerned about the fact that now that he's back in Makkah, will he leave? Will he leave us? Will the Prophet leave the people of Madinah? Will he leave the Ansars, and he will instead stay in Madinah, in Makkah for good? And Madinah will not be as significant as it was before. And the Prophet ﷺ, he says that my life and my death is with you, the people of Ansar. And that brought tremendous relief upon them. This brought tremendous happiness upon them. And this is one important message that the Prophet is teaching us. He's telling us the importance of remembering the good that people have done to you. Remember, the Prophet ﷺ, he was rejected by his own people in Makkah. Only a few years back, 8 years back, he was almost 8 to 10 years back, he was rejected to the point that he was about to be killed. And the people who accepted the Prophet, the people who reached out to the Prophet, the people who decided to support the Prophet were the people of Madinah, the Ansar. They accepted the Prophet ﷺ. They took him in. So the Prophet never forgets that. And this is a very important message, because the Prophet, throughout his life, he will show the importance of always remembering the good things people have done unto him. And this even extends to the people who didn't believe in him but were still nice to him. There was an occasion the Prophet ﷺ was seated with his companions, and then suddenly he stood up for a man, and the man came by, and then the Prophet and the companions asked, who is this person? And he says, this is my father by breastfeeding. Right? This was the husband of the Prophet's mother by breastfeeding, who is Sayyidatina Halimatu Sa'diyah. The Prophet stood up, beckoned to the man, and then he extended his cloak to let him sit. And just as they were seated, Halimatu Sa'diyah, the Prophet's mother, by breastfeeding, came by, and the Prophet ﷺ stood up, beckoned to her, extended the cloak again, and let her sit. And then the third one, the brother by breastfeeding, all right, the son of Halimatu Sa'diyah came by, the Prophet extended his cloak. So all of them, he honored them by letting them sit on his blessed cloak, to show that the Prophet remembered the people who helped him out, the people who actually raised him. And this was even before he was made a prophet. All right, he remembered them. And we tend to forget about the people who have done good to us. Right? These were the people who really helped him when he was young. They were breastfeeding him. So the Prophet took pains to actually remember them. He remembered these people, and we tend to forget the people. The earlier they were in our life, the more we forget about them. And we keep in touch with the people, with people who existed in the early part of our life, our primary school teachers, our primary school friends, right? Our neighbors who we lived in for most parts of our life, and then we moved out after we get married. We still remember them. We still keep in touch with them. We still communicate with them. That's one. The Prophet ﷺ, every Idul Adha, we're going to celebrate Idul Adha soon. The meat for sacrifice, he will make sure that some, right, is given to Sayyidatina Khadijah, right? Sayyidatina Khadijah's family and friends. So he also remembered who her friends were, because he remembered the good that Sayyidatina Khadijah has done for his cause, for the Muslim cause, for the Islamic cause, and he never forgets. Another instance. So we're talking about these Muslims. Remember the Prophet ﷺ, he was boycotted by the people of Makkah. Most of the people of Makkah, he and his family and the believers, they were boycotted. One of those people who pushed for the boycott to be removed, for the boycott to be lifted, was a man called Fudholah Bin Umayr. He didn't become Muslim. In fact, in the Battle of Badr, the Prophet ﷺ said that if you encounter Abu Bakhtari, do not kill him, do not slay him, but instead take him in as a prisoner. Because the Prophet remembers the good things. So it's important for us to remember two things in our life. To remember, firstly, the good things people have done unto us, no matter how little. And secondly, to remember the misdeeds, the shortcomings that we have done unto others. So firstly, remember the good things people have done unto us. Because why? So that we will find means and ways to actually repay that kindness. Find means and ways to make dua for that person to continue to be blessed. We have this problem whereby we tend to forget the things that people do to us. Why? Because the mistakes they make to us in return has been magnified more than the good they do to us. Our friends sometimes, all right? Often it's our friends, not even sometimes, all right? 10 years, they have been our good friend. 10 years, they have been a blessing to us. One time they make a small mistake, they err a little in relation to us, and then we suddenly remember that one moment, and those 10 years are gone down the drain. And if we have done misdeed unto others, and we have done wrong unto others, it is therefore just as important for us to actually seek their forgiveness. So always remember that it's important for us to seek forgiveness from them, to continue doing good to them, to ensure that between us and them, before we return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all things are cleared. Because that's what the Prophet tells us to do. That's what Allah tells us to do. فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَ أَخَوَيْكُمْ, to better, to heal, to mend the ties between us and our brothers. So this is first lesson today, the first instant. Now, talking about people doing harm unto us or doing bad things unto us brings us to our second instance. The Prophet ﷺ, so he stayed in Makkah for about 2 weeks plus, all right? Some say 17, some say 18 days. He was there for this period of time, and he was doing his tawaf, or circumambulating around the Kaaba. And there was one man, right? There was one man who was doing the same, but his intention was different. The Prophet was doing tawaf for a purpose of worship. This man was doing tawaf to get an opportunity to kill the Prophet. So he was having rancor. Right? He was having rancor. He declared himself to be a Muslim, but at the same time, he wants to harm the Prophet because right, he still has anger against the Prophet. This man is called Fudholah Bin Umayr. Some people call him Fudholah, some people call him Fudholah. So Fudholah, all right, he was doing tawaf near the Prophet with the intention to harm the Prophet. Prophet ﷺ, right, asked him, Ya Fudholah, what are you doing? Right? When the Prophet talks to a person, he tells his full being to them. All right? What are you doing? And what kind of conversations are you having with yourself? And Fudholah, he says, no, I'm remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm doing tawaf and then remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam placed his hand onto the chest of Fudholah and say, seek Allah's forgiveness. You know, when he placed his hand on Fudholah's chest, Fudholah felt that his chest, his heart, his sentiments started to expand. He started to feel calm, started to feel at ease. This was a man who entered Tawaf with rancor, with hate, with hatred, with a very evil intention. He felt at ease. He felt composed. He felt tranquility. To the point where Fudholah actually said, when Fudholah said, he said that when the Prophet placed his hand on my chest, there was no person on this earth that I hated more than him. He was the most hated person. But when he lifted his hand from my chest, there was no other person in this world that I loved more than him. Again, a point for reflection. This was a man who wanted to kill the Prophet, and the Prophet knew about it. Look at how the Prophet responded. And secondly, bear in mind this important thing as well, that the Prophet, the way he dealt with people, this is the messenger of Allah, was that he provide calmness, he provide tranquility. He makes people around him be at ease with him. Right? Then of course, the people like Abu Jahl and Abu Lahab, they have issued the Prophet not because of the Prophet, but because of themselves. But in general, the Prophet made people around him feel comfortable around him. Let's look at ourselves. Sometimes, sadly, the more religious we become, the more devout we become, the more devoted to Allah we become, the more we make people around us very uncomfortable. The more people around us start to be weary about us. Not because of anything else, but because our mannerisms start to change. We start to decide not to have that smile for them. We decide somehow not to communicate with them warmly. We somehow develop this idea that now we are holier, now we are better, and we are not the dirty men we were in the past. And therefore, we should not treat people, we should only treat people who are as holy with the proper decorum, but people who don't matter to us anymore, so we don't actually address them. So that's why we do that. And sometimes these people exist in our own household. That when we start to be more religious, we start to know a little bit more hadith, we start to know more Quran, suddenly there's a lot of mistakes that's happening around us. Suddenly we start to pinpoint people's errors more than we try to be more forgiving and understanding and compassionate towards the process that we ourselves went through last time. So we sometimes forget all these things. So the Prophet ﷺ, he always made people feel at ease around him. And that's why there was one incident, there was a young man. You know, people in the past, they came to the Prophet, they do, sometimes what we would call them, they'll do the most absurd of things. That in today's context, being who we are, we will say that this is lacking in adab. And there was a man who went to the Prophet and he sought permission to fornicate, to perform zina. Now, he wanted to do zina. Now, the interesting part about this was that this man actually came to the Prophet to relay this to him, to show the kind of trust that the companions had at whatever age, that whatever anxieties, whatever issues, whatever that they want to do, they know that when they raise it to the Prophet, they won't be belittled, they won't be undermined, they won't be made fun of. They know that they'll be treated with respect nevertheless, despite of the shortcomings of their request, like this young man here. And the companions, they were taken aback, but the Prophet beckoned to this young man, talked to him gently, and made him, all right, and made him the person that's better after he left the Prophet. How many people see us, all right, and then they leave their meeting with us as better people, or they have a bad impression of us after they talk to us, or they leave with a very bitter experience. So this is something we need to pay attention to, starting from our own household. Right? Yes, we want to implement a household that is adhering to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that follows the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. But remember, the Prophet ﷺ, he showed compassion to his people in the household. خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِهِ وَأَنَا خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِ. He is most kind, he treats his family the best. And he says, that's the best of people amongst you, are those people who treat your family the best. And the best of people are those who are most compassionate. They are most understanding. Despite the fact that we want to introduce practices in our household that makes us close to Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, that practice itself must come with the foundations called with the foundations of compassion, with love, with tolerance, with understanding that this is not going to be an easy process. So this is a very important lesson that we should always put people at ease around us without compromising our stance, without compromising our dignity and ourselves. All right, but at the same time, we put them at ease. Now, the third lesson that we're going to share today is about a man, and we have never heard of the name of this man before. It's the first time I'm going to hear about this person's name. His name is Sayyidina Attab bin Usaid. Sayyidina Attab bin Usaid, and he is only 20 years old. What did the Prophet make him do? The Prophet ﷺ made him the governor of Makkah. Before he left, he made Attab bin Usaid the governor of Makkah. An interesting thing. This is 20 years old. They were more elderly. There were more elderly people in the community. There were more prominent people. But the Prophet wanted to teach us an important message. This young man is qualified by virtue of merit, that he's capable. So when we give a task onto someone, we must look at his capability. And the Prophet has no qualms about letting young people step forward to take up responsibilities. Because young people, they tend to be vibrant, they tend to have fresh ideas, right? And they tend to be very adventurous. And so they can move good things forward. Right? They already see perspectives that we do not see. We have the strength of sometimes being the elderly generation, we have the benefit of experience, we have the benefit of wisdom. Now this needs to be complemented with the adventurism, with the forward thinking, with the potential that the young people have to drive the community forward. And so there is a harmony, which is why the Prophet, he sent the ambassador to Madinah. His name was Sayyidina Fudholah Bin Umayr, and he was only in his 20s. Accompanying him was an elderly man called Abdullah bin Abi Maktum. So he sent both of them together. And Sayyidina Mus'ab, all right, he, by virtue of his wisdom, all right, he managed to convert most of Madinah. The Prophet ﷺ, all right, also gave responsibilities to a man called Zaid bin Thabit al-Ansari. Zaid bin Thabit al-Ansari was too young to go to war. Twice he went to Badr, twice, and he went to Uhud to get himself recruited as an army. But narration says that he's too small, he was too young, and his frame was too small. All right, and therefore the Prophet disallowed him to go. Why? The Prophet had bigger plans for him. What was the plan for Zaid bin Thabit al-Ansari? The Prophet wanted to make him a scribe, to write, all right, the revelation sent onto the Prophet ﷺ, and to master the Hebrew language and the Syriac language. And these are languages that are foreign to the people of Arab. They heard about them, but the mastery of them is none. Zaid bin Thabit, he mastered the Hebrew and Syriac language in a matter of 17 nights. MashaAllah. So the Prophet ﷺ gave the young people trust. And therefore, the companions that came after the Prophet, they went by their standards. They have no qualms, they have no issues in letting the young people step forward. That's why the Prophet's young companions, such as Sayyidina Abdullah bin Mas'ud, Sayyidina Abdullah bin Umar, Sayyidina Abdullah bin Abbas, they were young at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and they were still young when the Prophet left them. When the Prophet returned to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, they were still young. But Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq and Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab, the people who took over the mantle of leadership of the Muslim world, they sought their advice. They consulted these people, all right, in matters pertaining to religion, to ruling, to governance, and henceforth. It's important for us that to understand that the young generation, they have a lot to offer. Yes, they'll make mistakes. The young people, they'll make mistakes. The younger generation, they'll make mistakes. Then it's up for those people who are the elderly to guide them patiently, with compassion, with trust, because these young people are eventually going to take over the generation. They are going to be the people who lead the generation. They are going to be the people that lead the community. They are going to be the people that will need the support of the elderly behind them. Which is why Prophet says, وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى, to help one another in good things, in matters of taqwa. And the Prophet says, لَيْسَ مِنَّا مَنْ لَمْ يُوَكِّرْ كَبِيرَنَا وَيَرْحَمْ صَغِيرَنَا. Not from amongst us are those people who do not respect the elderly and have compassion for the young. And this harmony the seniority of the Prophet ﷺ, the seniority of Abu Bakr Siddiq, but the vibrancy of Sayyidina Mus'ab bin Umayr, the vibrancy of Attab bin Usaid that we learn about today. This is why the Muslim community then was solid. Why? Because there's an appreciation of the experience and the freshness brought about by both the older and younger generation. So these three lessons that we learned today, right? The importance of remembering the good things people have done for us, no matter how little. Secondly, to always be creating an environment that is conducive, to make things easy for people around us, to make people around us comfortable. And thirdly, for us to actually give trust to the young, to take the community forward. May we be a people who try our best to uphold the Sunnah of the Prophet in its greatest meaning, even though through these very small events. And inshallah, next week, we're going to look at how the Prophet ﷺ now has gotten mass support. It's supposed to be easy, right? We have the numbers now. In the past, we struggled in the Battle of Badr, small numbers, Uhud, small numbers, Ahzab, small numbers. Now we have the numbers. The biggest following in the Arabian Peninsula is going to be easy from now on. In fact, the challenge, and we said this before, challenges are going to come continuously in the Prophet's time, despite the seemingly easy circumstances even. But we will leave that to next week. May we have a restful night. May we be a people who are blessed with knowledge and the blessings of being able to act upon the knowledge that we have learned, and the blessings of being able to act upon the beautiful akhlaq of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Walhamdulillah bil alamin. Wassalamu alaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh.